My name is Ava. And if someone had told me 3 years ago that the person I trusted least in my life would become the person who would change it forever, I would have laughed. Because I was certain. He was the enemy. I saw him every day. He stood right next to my husband. He knew all his secrets. And worst of all, it seemed to me that he was helping him hide them from me. But I was wrong. I just didn't know the whole story. Back then, I was living in Santa Barbara, California. My life felt like I'd stepped into someone else's fairy tale. A house with an ocean view. Morning coffee on the terrace. Travel. A handsome man whom everyone respected. Nolan West. A successful entrepreneur who was 35. He was the kind of man other women would say, "You're so lucky." And I thought so, too. When I met him, I was just a simple girl working at a small coffee shop near the beach. I didn't have expensive clothes. I didn't go on vacation to Europe. I knew nothing about the world where people like Nolan lived. But he looked at me as if I were the most interesting person in the room. He said, "You're the only one who isn't trying to get something from me." And I believed him. Perhaps that was my biggest mistake. Because I didn't just fall in love with a man. I fell in love with the version of himself that he showed me. After the wedding, everything was perfect. At least at first. And then small changes began to appear. He started staying late at work. His phone was always face down. He started asking less often how I was doing. But I kept making excuses. He's just tired. He has a lot on his plate. It's hard for successful people. I always found a reason why he was pulling away. Until one day, Leo came into our lives. I first saw him near our house. He was standing next to a black car, holding the keys in his hand. Tall. Calm. Always serious. Nolan introduced him. "This is Leo. He'll be helping me with my trips and errands." I smiled. "Nice to meet you." Leo just nodded. "Likewise, Mrs. West." And for some reason, it was that very aloofness that struck me. He wasn't trying to win me over. He didn't pay me compliments. He didn't smile. He just watched. And I hated it when someone looked at me like that. As if he could see more than I wanted to show. Over time, I began to notice strange things. When Nolan forgot important dates, Leo remembered them. When I was sick, Leo left medicine in the kitchen. When we went somewhere, he always checked to make sure I was comfortable. But instead of gratitude, I felt irritation. Because I thought, why does a stranger notice this, but my husband doesn't? One evening, Nolan came home late. I was waiting for him in the kitchen. "Where were you?" He took off his jacket. "Work." "Again?" His expression changed. "Ava, we've already talked about this." I fell silent. Because I knew that tone. The same tone that always made me feel guilty. A few minutes later, he said, "You've been acting really suspicious lately." I looked at him. "Maybe because you've changed." He didn't say anything. He just walked away. The next morning, I saw Leo by the car. He was looking at me. And I suddenly thought, he knows. He definitely knows something. That day, for the first time, I began to suspect that the problem wasn't just Nolan's busy schedule. Maybe he had another woman. And Leo was the one helping him keep it all a secret. I didn't know just how wrong I was. Because the truth was much more painful. And much closer than I could have imagined. For the next few weeks, I felt as if I were constantly waiting for a blow to come. I started noticing things I hadn't paid attention to before. Nolan always had his phone with him. Even in the bathroom. Even when he just stepped out into the yard for a few minutes. I would have joked about it before. Now it seemed to me that his every move meant something. And the worst part was that Leo was always around. He saw everything. He knew when Nolan came home. He knew who Nolan was meeting with. He knew Nolan's schedule better than I did. And it was driving me crazy. One evening, I saw Nolan get out of the car and whisper something to Leo. They both fell silent when they noticed me. My heart sank. I walked over. What were you talking about? Nolan didn't even change his expression. Work. Seriously? He sighed. Ava, don't start. Don't start. Those two words had become almost a symbol of our marriage to me. Don't start asking questions. Don't start doubting. Don't start talking about what's hurting you. I looked at Leo. He stood there silently. And it was his silence that made me angry. What about you? He looked up, surprised. What about me? You're always there. You see everything. You know everything. I paused. If something's going on with me, you know, right? For the first time, emotion flashed across his face. Not guilt. Not fear. Something else. Sadness. But I didn't want to see that. I wanted him to be to blame. Because that made it easier. That way, I could be angry at someone specific. A few days later, Nolan said we were going to a charity event in Beverly Hills. I had to pick out a dress. There was a time when moments like that made me happy. I loved it when he looked at me. But now I wasn't sure if he even saw me anymore. Before the event, I stood in front of the mirror. I was wearing a dark green dress. It was simple, but pretty. I went downstairs. Nolan looked at me. For a second, it seemed to me that he was once again the man I'd fallen in love with. You're beautiful. I smiled. Maybe I'd just imagined it all? Maybe I really was being paranoid? And then he added. But next time, choose something more appropriate for events like this. And everything came crashing back. At the party, I felt like an outsider. People around me were talking about investments, yachts, and travel. I stood next to Nolan and felt like nothing more than a pretty accessory. And then I saw Leo. He was standing a little further away. And he was looking at me. Not the way you look at a beautiful woman. But the way you look at someone who's barely holding it together. I looked away. Because it made me uncomfortable. I didn't need his pity. Later that evening, Nolan disappeared. He said he had to make a call. 20 minutes passed. Then 30. I went out onto the terrace. And I saw him. He was standing with a woman. She was laughing. He was holding her hand. It was as if my world had stopped. I couldn't hear the music. I couldn't hear anyone. Only my own heartbeat. I wanted to go over there. I wanted to scream. But then I saw Leo. He was standing behind me. And he saw it, too. Our eyes met. And there was no surprise in his eyes. As if he knew. As if he'd been waiting for this moment. I barely whispered. Did you know? Leo was silent. You knew and didn't tell me anything? His jaw tensed. Ava. No. I stepped back. Don't. It hurt. But I was even more ashamed. Because I realized. I was the last person to find out. Even a stranger knew more than I did. I went home alone. Nolan didn't even notice I'd left. The next morning, I woke up to a message. From Leo. It contained just one sentence. I didn't want you to find out this way. I stared at the screen. My hands were shaking. Because it meant one thing. He knew. He'd known for a long time. And yet he'd kept quiet. I replied. Why? A few minutes later, a message came. Because I didn't know if I had the right to interfere in your life. I put my phone down. I wanted to hate him. But for some reason, that very answer made it even more painful. Because the person I thought was cold and indifferent turned out to be the only one who had even considered my feelings. But I didn't know the most important thing yet. I didn't know how many years Leo had been carrying this truth inside him. And why he was so afraid to tell me. For the next few days, I felt as if I were in a fog. I still woke up in our bedroom. I still saw Nolan's shirts in the closet. I still heard his voice in the hallway. But something had changed. Because now I knew. I could no longer convince myself that everything was fine. I wasn't a wife who overthought things. I wasn't overly sensitive. I was simply sensing what he'd been trying to hide for years. Betrayal. Nolan acted as if nothing had happened. And that was the worst part. He'd come home. He'd kiss me on the cheek. He'd ask, "How was your day?" As if he hadn't shattered everything I'd been building. One evening, I couldn't take it anymore. "Who is she?" He froze. Just for a second. But that was enough for me. Because someone who has nothing to hide doesn't react that way. "What are you talking about?" I laughed. Not because it was funny. But because it suddenly became clear just how used to lying he had become. "Don't pretend you don't know." He ran his hand over his face. "Ava." And I heard what I'd been afraid of. Not a denial. Not "you're wrong." But my name. That's what people say when there's no point in lying anymore. "How long?" He was silent. "How long, Nolan?" He looked down. "A few months." A few months. Those words sounded so simple. But behind them lay everything. Months when I waited for him at home. Months when I thought he was just tired. Months when I blamed myself. I walked out of the room. And that was when I saw myself honestly for the first time. I wasn't afraid of losing my husband. I was afraid to admit that he had lost me long ago. The next morning, I did something I had never done before. I found her. Her name was Mia. She was a photographer. Younger than me. Beautiful. Confident. Exactly as I'd imagined her. I expected to hate her. To see an enemy. But when we met at a small cafe by the ocean in Malibu, I felt something completely different. She looked nervous. Not triumphant. Not as if she'd won. She sat across from me, staring at her hands the whole time. "Are you Ava?" I nodded. She let out a heavy sigh. I knew this day would come. That surprised me. "You knew?" She nodded. "Nolan said your marriage had been over for a long time." I stayed silent. Because those words hurt. But I wasn't surprised. That was exactly what he would have said. "He said you live like strangers." I lowered my eyes. Because, in part, it was true. But not the way he made it out to be. Because I never stopped loving him. I just got tired of being the only one trying. Mia looked at me. "I want to tell you something." I waited. "I thought he was going to leave you." My heart sank. "What?" She smiled bitterly. "He promised." A pause. "He always promised." And then I understood. I wasn't the first person he'd lied to. "Did you know he was married?" She nodded. "Yes." A chill ran down my spine. "And that didn't stop you?" She was silent for a long time. Then she said, "Not at first." I waited for her to continue. But then I realized he never intended to change anything. She looked me in the eyes. "He doesn't love people. He loves how people make him feel." That phrase stuck in my head. Because it described him better than I ever could. I left the cafe feeling completely devastated. But on my way home, I got a message. From Leo. I heard you met with Mia. I stopped. How did he know? I replied. Are you following me? He wrote back almost immediately. No. Pause. I'm just worried. I wanted to get angry. But I couldn't. Because for the first time in a long time, someone was worried not about what I could do for him, but because I was hurting. That evening, I went home. Nolan was sitting in the living room. We need to talk. I looked at him. And for the first time, I didn't see the man I loved. I saw the person who had made me doubt myself for years. No, Nolan. He looked up in surprise. What? I paused. This time, you're going to listen. And that was the moment the truth began. The truth that Leo had known long before I did. Nolan looked at me as if, for the first time, he was seeing not the Ava who always forgave. Not the one who waited. Not the one who made excuses. But a person who was finally tired. Do you seriously want to end it all because of one mistake? I almost laughed. One mistake. It was so easy to sum up years of lies with a single word. One? My voice was quiet. But this time, I wasn't trembling. Nolan, you don't even realize what exactly you've broken. He leaned back on the couch. You're overreacting. And that's when I realized it. Even now. Even when everything became obvious. He wasn't thinking about what he'd done. He was only thinking about what he was losing. The next morning, I packed my things. Not everything. Just the bare essentials. It felt strange to look at our house. Not long ago, I thought this was the place where I'd spend the rest of my life. Now it just seemed like a beautiful cage. As I was leaving, Leo was standing by the gate. I stopped. What are you doing here? He was holding the car keys. I'll drive you. I shook my head. I don't need a savior. His expression changed slightly. I know. A pause. I just don't want you to go alone. And for some reason, those very words broke me. No grand promises. No fancy phrases. Just a person who noticed that I was having a hard time. I got into the car. We drove in silence. After a few minutes, I said, why didn't you tell me? Leo was looking at the road. About Nolan? I nodded. He was silent for a long time. Because it's not my story. But you knew. Yes. Then why? He gripped the steering wheel tightly. Because I saw you. I looked at him. What? He sighed. I saw how you waited for him at night. How you pretended not to notice when he canceled plans. How you laughed when you were in pain, so no one would worry. I was silent. Because he was saying things that no one had ever noticed. Not even me. You thought no one could see. He smiled slightly. But I saw. I turned away toward the window. And for the first time in a long time, I wanted to cry, not because of the pain. But because someone had finally understood. A few days later, I moved into a small apartment near the beach. There was no huge house. There was no expensive furniture. There was no picture-perfect life. But for the first time in years, I woke up without fearing that I'd done something wrong. One evening, I ran into Leo by chance. He was sitting in a coffee shop, reading a book. I wanted to walk right past him. But he looked up. Ava. I smiled. Hi. He pointed to the chair across from him. Mind if I sit here? I sat down. We talked for hours. About everything. Except Nolan. And that was strange. Because for the first time, the person next to me wasn't trying to talk about my ex-husband. He wanted to get to know me. Me. Not Nolan's wife. Not a part of his life. Just Ava. Have you always been like this? He asked suddenly. I was taken aback. Like what? Like someone who thinks she has to earn love. I froze. Because it was painfully accurate. I smiled. Maybe. He lowered his eyes. That's too bad. Why? He replied quietly. Because you never had to earn it. I didn't know what to say. So I just looked at him. And for the first time, I noticed what I hadn't wanted to see before. Leo never looked at me the way Nolan did. Nolan looked at me when I was convenient. Beautiful. Devoted. But Leo looked at me when I was broken. And he stayed anyway. But that was exactly when Nolan came back from the past. He started texting me. First. We need to talk. Then. I understand everything. Then. I miss you. I didn't reply. But one day he wrote. I know you're seeing Leo. My heart skipped a beat. A few seconds later, another message arrived. Don't tell me he finally got what he wanted. I reread those words several times. And I realized. Nolan knew. There was only one question. What exactly did he know about Leo? And why had Leo never told me the truth? The phone remained in my hand for a long time. I reread Nolan's message over and over again. Just don't tell me he finally got what he wanted. What did he mean? I'd known Leo for almost a year. He never let himself cross any lines. Not a single hint. Not a single inappropriate glance. Not a single touch that could be misinterpreted. So what did Nolan know? The next day, I texted Leo myself. Can we meet up? The reply came almost immediately. Sure. We agreed to meet in a small park overlooking the ocean in Carmel. It was always quiet there. Just the sound of the waves, the scent of pine trees, and seagulls circling above the cliffs. Leo was already waiting for me on a bench. He was wearing plain jeans, a dark blue shirt, and sunglasses. It was the first time I'd seen him not as a driver. He seemed like an ordinary person. Hi. Hi, Ava. I sat down next to him. We were silent for a few minutes. Then I handed him my phone. Read this. He looked closely at the message. His expression turned serious. He decided to use it after all. Use what? Leo exhaled slowly. He knew. Knew what, exactly? That I couldn't stand by and watch how he treated you. I frowned. That's not an answer. He remained silent. I was starting to get annoyed. Leo, please. No riddles. He took off his glasses and looked me straight in the eyes. When Nolan first offered me a job working for him, he said one strange thing. What was it? Just don't forget, she's too kind. If she falls out with me, she'll stay anyway. My breath caught in my throat. Did he really say that? Leo nodded. At the time, I thought it was a bad joke. And then? Then I saw that it was true. He spoke calmly. Without any anger. Without wanting to make Nolan out to be a monster. Just the facts. He knew you'd forgive him. He knew you'd always find an explanation. He knew you'd put his needs before your own. I looked out at the ocean. My chest felt empty. Why do people do that? Leo didn't answer right away. Because some people start to take love for granted. And stop appreciating it. I remembered all those evenings. How I'd wait for him with dinner ready. How I put my own dreams on hold. How I told my friends. He's just going through a rough patch. In reality, I was the one going through a rough patch. I just wouldn't let myself admit it. A week later, Mia called me. I was surprised. Hi. Can we meet up? We sat down at the same cafe again. But this time she looked completely different. No expensive makeup. No confidence. Tired. She set her cup down on the table. He's back. To you? She smiled bitterly. Yes. I didn't say anything. He said it was a mistake. That you didn't understand him. That I'm the only person who can make him happy. She lowered her eyes. Did he tell you the same thing? I smiled sadly. Almost word for word. Mia laughed nervously. You know what's the scariest part? I shook my head. I almost believed him a second time. I looked at her and suddenly understood. We had never been enemies. We were two women to whom the same person had told different stories. It's just that mine lasted longer. As we were saying goodbye, Mia suddenly said, Hey. Yes? Don't push people away just because you're used to thinking that love is always supposed to hurt. I didn't say anything. But on the way home, I kept thinking about her words. Because for the first time in a very long time, there was someone by my side who didn't demand anything. Who didn't force me to change. Didn't try to convince me that I wasn't good enough. Leo was just there. And maybe that's what scared me the most. Because I'd almost forgotten what it was like to trust someone without fear. After talking with Mia, it seemed to me that the hardest part was already behind me. I was wrong. As soon as Nolan realized I wasn't coming back, he stopped begging. He started fighting. At first, it was flowers. Every morning, a new bouquet would be waiting at my apartment door. White roses. My favorites. Once upon a time. Now they only made me anxious. I didn't even pick them up. The doorman once asked sympathetically, Should I tell that man not to bring them anymore? I just shook my head. He won't listen anyway. A few days later, the messages started. I know you still love me. We both made mistakes. Leo is just taking advantage of your situation. Then the calls. Dozens of calls. I stopped answering. Then he started messaging our mutual friends. One evening, Lindsay called me. We hadn't seen each other in a few months. Hey, everything okay? Yeah. What's up? She hesitated. Nolan said you're having a nervous breakdown. I stayed silent. He says you made it all up. That there was no cheating and you're just too jealous. I closed my eyes. Even now. Even after everything. He was trying to make people doubt not him. But me. That was so typical of Nolan. When he couldn't control the situation, he started controlling other people's opinions. A few days later, I ran into him by chance. I was just leaving the grocery store. He was standing by my car. As if he'd been waiting there for a long time. We need to talk. His voice was calm. Too calm. We've already said everything to each other. No. He took a step closer. It's all because of Leo. I stayed silent. He's wanted this for a long time. Wanted what? Nolan laughed. You. I felt a wave of anger rising inside me. Don't you dare. Hey, you don't know anything. Then tell me. He tilted his head. He fell in love with you back when he was working for me during his first month. I froze. Nolan watched my reaction closely. See? I told you so. He was just biding his time. His words stuck in my head. All the way home, I tried to push them aside. But they kept coming back. Again. And again. That evening, I couldn't take it anymore. I texted Leo. I need to know the truth. He replied. Come over. His house stood on a hill not far from Monterey. It was small. No frills. Bright. Lavender grew by the porch. For some reason, I'd expected to see something completely different. Leo opened the door almost immediately. He didn't even ask any questions. It was as if he already knew why I'd come. We sat on the terrace. The ocean roared in front of us. I couldn't stay silent any longer. Nolan said. Leo just smiled sadly. I can guess exactly what he said. Is it true? He was silent. And that silence scared me more than any words could. Leo. He slowly rubbed his hands together. Yes. My heart skipped a beat. But not the way he made it out to be. I didn't interrupt. When I first saw you. He smiled with his eyes. You were sitting on the steps of your house. It was late fall. It was cold. You were waiting for Nolan. I frowned. I really did remember that evening. I'd sat outside for almost an hour. Because I wanted to surprise him. You were holding a bag of food. He chuckled softly. It had gone cold a long time ago. But when he finally arrived, you pretended you'd just gotten there. So he wouldn't feel guilty. I looked at Leo, not taking my eyes off him. That's when I realized it. Realized what? He was silent for a long time. That you deserve so much more. My throat tightened. And so, I started to care. But I never allowed myself to even think of you as a woman while you were his wife. What? Because I was too ashamed to stay by your side. I didn't know that. But that was exactly when I accidentally found out about his infidelities. And you stayed. I asked quietly. Because of me? He nodded. I was afraid that one day you'd need someone who at least knew the truth. Tears rolled down my cheeks on their own. Why didn't you just tell me? He smiled sadly. Because then you wouldn't have believed me. And I knew it. He was right. Back then, I was ready to defend Nolan from the whole world. Even from the truth. We sat in silence. The sun was already setting over the ocean. And suddenly, Leo said very quietly. Hey. Yes? I don't expect anything from you. I'm not asking for you to feel the same way. I'm not asking for a second chance. He looked me straight in the eyes. I just want you to learn to feel loved again someday. Not necessarily by me. Just loved. It was those very words that finally broke down the wall I'd been building around myself these past few years. Because for the first time in my life, a man wasn't demanding anything in exchange for his care. He just wanted me to be happy. After that conversation on the terrace, I didn't see Leo for almost 2 weeks. Not because he disappeared. But because he deliberately gave me space. He didn't text. He didn't call. He didn't look for an excuse to run into me by chance. And that's what surprised me the most. All my adult life, men have wanted something from me. My time. My patience. My attention. My forgiveness. But Leo didn't ask for anything. He simply let me figure out my own feelings on my own. And that's probably why I started thinking about him more and more often. The divorce was almost finalized. All that was left was to sign the final papers. My lawyer warned me. Nolan doesn't want an amicable settlement. He's contesting almost everything. I just sighed. It was predictable. Even though he could no longer control me as his wife, he was trying to control the process of our separation. A few days later, his mother called me. We'd always gotten along well. Hi. Can we meet up? I agreed. We sat down at a small restaurant on the waterfront. She was silent for a long time. Then she said quietly, I want to apologize to you. I looked at her in surprise. For what? Her eyes grew sad. For seeing how he becomes when he's with you, and not saying anything. You knew? She nodded slowly. He always loved it when people admired him. And when he stopped getting that admiration, he looked for it somewhere else. I was silent. I thought he'd grow up after the wedding. She smiled sadly. But people only grow up when they want to. Before we said goodbye, she took my hand. Don't blame yourself. You were the best wife he could have had. He just wasn't the kind of man who could appreciate it. A week later, something happened that I hadn't expected at all. Our mutual friends organized a charity event. At first, I didn't want to go. But Lindsay literally forced me to. Don't let him take your life away, too. I agreed. When I walked into the hall, I saw Nolan right away. He noticed me, too. And he headed straight for me. Hey. I looked at him calmly. Hi. Can we talk? I think we've already said everything. He shook his head. No. I want to apologize. I stayed silent. People around us had already started looking our way. I was a fool. I understand everything. Give me one more chance. I used to dream of hearing those exact words. I used to. But now they didn't stir anything in me. Just exhaustion. I replied quietly. You're asking for a chance not because you've changed. But because I realized that I can't be brought back the old way anymore. His face tensed. Is this because of Leo? I didn't answer. And just then, a familiar voice rang out behind me. No, Nolan. We both turned around. Leo. He was standing a few meters away. Calm. In a dark blue suit. His gaze was confident, but not at all aggressive. It's because of you. The room fell silent. Nolan laughed bitterly. Oh, finally. The hero has arrived. You think you're better than me? Leo's expression didn't even change. No. It's just that I never made her doubt her own worth. Those words seemed to hang in the air. Nolan looked at me. So is that true? I replied calmly. I haven't started a new relationship with anyone yet. But do you know what the difference is between you two? He was silent. Leo never once asked me to choose him. He just helped me choose myself again. I saw Nolan's hands trembling. He wanted to say something. But he couldn't find the words. For the first time since we'd met, he wasn't in control of the situation. For the first time, he couldn't convince anyone. He just turned around and walked away. I watched him go. And suddenly, I realized I didn't feel anything anymore. No anger. No resentment. No love. Just peace. When everyone had dispersed, Leo came up to me. How are you? I smiled. I'm fine. Really? I nodded. For the first time in a very long time, it's true. We slowly stepped out onto the terrace. The sun was already setting over the ocean. The wind gently ruffled my hair. You know, Leo said quietly. I'm still afraid to take even one extra step. I looked at him in surprise. Why? He smiled. Because you spent too long with someone who made you give more than you received. And I don't want you to think, even for a second, that I'm the same way. I didn't answer. I just did something I hadn't planned to do. I gently took his hand. He didn't even squeeze it. As if he were afraid of scaring me away. And that's when I realized. Sometimes love doesn't start with passion. Not with grand declarations. And not even with the first kiss. Sometimes it begins with a person next to whom, for the first time in many years, you can simply stop being afraid. But I didn't know yet that the most important conversation between us was still ahead. It was that conversation that would ultimately change all of our lives.